here together, and then they're going to engage in a brief conversation with each other. And we're going to start the question with we're on their names. We're all doctors, but we're on first name terms. So we're going to use your first name, beginning with Karla. So Karla, I know that for many years, even before you returned to LA Unified, in your current role as deputy superintendent, you've been working on systems, right? You've been wanting to push the system to really break through some of the barriers. Please describe for us a little bit about that work, where we are, where we still need to go.
Well, thank you. I just want to thank LMU for bringing us together and our LAUSD team for just all the hard work to bring everyone together for this conversation. And I'm a little nervous, and you know why? Because Dr. Artiles is like your hero that you read and wrote about, and but it's quite an honor to be here with you. You were cutting edge for this work, and I'm grateful for it. So when you think about the systems, I also think about that teacher in the classroom. Because I think when you think about that teacher in the classroom, it also reminds you, as Dr. Artiles talked about, the moral imperative to the work. And so when I think about systems, I think about it from that lens. As a teacher, I was a special education teacher. Who else in the room? Special ed teachers in the room. All right, excellent. So you know that many a time you would work with students and you would see all their talents and skills, and you're just thinking, what happened? And I had the opportunity to see that I had quite a few English learners in my classroom who are identified as intellectually disabled. And I started to look into that because I thought, well, you're performing in so many ways. I give you the right support. I teach you in a certain way, and you pick up and run. So what is the issue here? And what I found out was that a lot of my English learners were being misidentified. Maybe they had a disability, as Dr. Artiles talked about. Maybe they didn't. Maybe it was a fact that since kindergarten, people already thought they had some kind of cognitive impairment. So it helped me to realize that I had to think differently about this work. And so when I think about systems, I think about that classroom teacher and the decisions they're making, the engagement they have with families, and that makes me think about a couple things. So first, data systems. I think too often we're making decisions, whether as an entire district, that classroom teacher, without the right information to understand. What do I mean by that? If you know that you have a student whose language development as an English learner is one in which they're starting to develop their language, then you cannot then say that they do or do not have a disability. It's just something that you flag and you start to think about, okay, let me explore and learn more about the student. Data also helps you to be able to know what are some of within the school, outside of the school. I mean, I've always worked in large urban school districts, so when you're thinking about LA Unified, over 500,000 students, how do you begin to really understand a student if you don't dig deeper into the layers of that data? Again, having worked at the state level, same thing. You have to be able to have data at your fingertip that allows you to understand the different dynamics of a student's identity, that it's not just one thing. So you have to understand those things. It also includes that informal data, because once you also know what motivates kids, I don't know about you, but if you are working so hard as a kid and things, and what the family brings to the table, again, you get what I'm going around the data. So data systems are really important, and it also allows you to then be reflective of what's working for you or not. As a teacher, without that, then how are you able to make good informed decisions? So I find that those data systems, those that are working in LA Unified know that for our superintendent, that's been an important driver. It is something we know works well, so we're going back to what we know works. The second piece that I would say is an asset-based approach. I think one of the things that's really hard is to be that courageous person in the room and saying, I think we're talking about our kids in a deficit, from a deficit perspective. How many have had to do that before? Be that lone voice. You know what? Continue to be courageous. You have to be able to reestablish, especially from a systems approach. If you're not changing the frame of conversation, it is not going to change in our actions. So taking that asset-based approach is something that I've really seen work well, not only in practice, but here's an important part, in policy. In school district, policy is really important, but it's the thing that we get in our email and we're like, oh, isn't that a new policy? But people don't realize that it informs a lot of the decisions down to where dollars are spent, where people are placed, what curriculum you buy. Policy really matters. So understanding that from an asset-based approach is really great. I would also say that as Dr. Artiles talked about dignity, I find that is such an interesting term to use and one that serves with such great power. So I would make sure that as we think about it, I would love to learn more about the dignity piece because I think it's that next phase. The third thing I think about is acting, but acting in a collaborative manner. And I'm going to say this is the other thing it requires, a little vulnerability. I'm sorry, friends, I know we're educators or involved in research, and we don't need to know everything, I promise you. It's okay. But that does mean in this work that if you're collaborating with other departments, other divisions, if you're going to take those walls down, you have to sometimes be that vulnerable person and say, I don't know about that, tell me more. And that's not an easy thing to do. It's one of the things, as I've worked in different systems, has been one of the greatest joy, but also the greatest pain, because I always remind people collaboration is great, but collaboration's hard. It requires you to also say, I'm not going to push this thing forward because I'm going to take a step back so someone else could take a step forward. And lastly, I find that it's also important to have specific strategies. It is complicated to understand the impact of language, impact of a disability or different abilities or learning differences. It's not an easy thing to do. And especially if you think about some of our kids who are nonverbal, kids who have a disability who are nonverbal, you have to, this is why I say the data is so important, you have to understand what informs, influences, motivates kids. But those specific strategies are things that our teachers, our parents, our families, our students are trying to understand. How do I, if I have a learning difference, what can I do while at the same time recognizing I'm accessing the learning in different ways, including through language? One of the things I've also found is this is why people pick one thing over the other. So when it comes to our students who are dually identified, sometimes what I find with them is that the special education takes more priority. Why do you think that is? Legally. Legally, people are paying attention to those things. They're tracking it in a certain way. But that doesn't make it a priority. But if you don't know how to access language needs as well as ability needs, then what do? You go to what is easier for you to work with. So that strategies piece, I don't know about you, but it's taken quite some time to see people come together to build really strong strategies that work in meeting those different needs. And as we think about the systems approach, I think this is the other thing that I find it is, and in this room, where is some of the folks from the Division of Special Education here? If you could just raise your hands. All right. Where are the folks from my med team, the multilingual, multicultural? See, we're all in one room together, learning together. We're all here to try to engage in this work together and understanding. And so I think it's just bringing people together sometimes is also your first step and your first start. Thank you.
I just want to chime in and say thank you to Dr. Estrada, especially as she was serving in the capacity as CCEE and gave us the opportunity for Imperial County SELPA, and in giving us the opportunity to be the disseminators and professional development holders for the California Practitioner's Guide for Educating English Learners with Disabilities. And in that work, we have talked so many times over years about this collective commitment, about assuring that EL specialists, special educators, that we're coming together and building in this collective capacity building of ourselves, but to ensure that we're fostering what our students need, that we're disaggregating and tangling, if you will, the needs as a result from the disability while acknowledging, preserving culture and language as we foster, again, our students' abilities to be multilingual learners. So I definitely appreciate that, because I think that's what it's really built on, is us working together in unison, assuring that students retain their core of comprehensive ELD as they have, if they have a disability, then also layering on that support as general ed students first. So I think that should resonate with all of us, that it's not either or, not one more precedent than the other, but identifying what are the true needs of the student and identifying that true balance of what the depth and complexity is of the disability, as well as the needs as a result from that individual English learner, as again, our students are varied within their needs as a result of the disability, and varied as it results in their needs towards gaining greater levels of English language acquisition. So it really is a complex conversation that we're having. So I just want to say thank you to LMU. Thank you to Dr. Thiles, honored to be here with you all. So appreciating everyone.
Thank you. And